Este es el último episodio de nuestra serie de contenidos grabados en el Bogotá Audiovisual Market. Arrancan en el episodio 147, así que si no los has escuchado te invito a que te des una pasada por esos episodios. Igual hemos creado una lista en Spotify y en YouTube para que puedas acceder a todos ellos. Ahí vas a encontrar discusiones sobre el panorama de la animación en Latinoamérica, las narrativas audiovisuales y del cine en los videojuegos, charlas sobre supervisión musical, sobre la música, particularmente en el cine de Víctor Gaviria, un tema trascendental como la salud mental, los espacios de cuidado en la industria audiovisual, el análisis de cómo podemos como latinos entrar al mercado de Estados Unidos. Incluso hablamos de los 20 años de la ley de cine en Colombia. Gracias a todo el equipo de Proimágenes que nos hizo la conexión con el equipo del BAM para poder nosotros tener un stand especial donde pudimos registrar estas grabaciones para ti. Un saludo especial a Carlos Micán, que fue la persona que programó todos estos contenidos desde el BAM, que hizo la selección y la curaduría de los invitados, así que para él, chapó y muchas gracias. Ojalá que podamos seguir trabajando juntos y que sigamos festivaleando. Este episodio está muy chévere. Tenemos dos invitados tremendos. Es un episodio y una conversación en inglés para que te pongas audífonos y descubras qué pasa con el panorama del cine de género, especialmente terror y fantasía en Colombia, Latinoamérica y en general en el mundo. Si quieres pasarte por los otros episodios de Gente que hace cine, tenemos unas conversaciones maravillosas, más de 150 contenidos para ti, para que, como nosotros, aprendas de cine conversando. Hola, ¿cómo vas? Espero que muy bien. Allí en el lugar y en el momento donde le hayas dado play a este contenido, te doy la bienvenida a un nuevo episodio grabado en vivo desde el BAM, el Bogotá Audiovisual Market, gracias a Proimágenes Colombia, a todo el equipo del BAM, el patrocinio de Umaña y Abogados Asociados, al apoyo de Mediatex, Distrito Audiovisual y Gente que Productora. Ajústate los audífonos, trae tu bebida favorita. Esto es Gente que hace cine, el podcast donde aprendemos de cine conversando con sus creadores. Con una audiencia que se compromete profundamente con lo que consume, los contenidos de Género han construido una comunidad que anualmente moviliza miles de millones de dólares. En esta Market Session conoceremos desde la voz del desarrollo y la producción las profundidades de esta pasión que no es exclusiva de Geeks y crece con fuerza en Latinoamérica. Seguimos probando este nuevo formato en Gente que hace cine. Se llama Yo los presento y ellos conversan. Nosotros nos sentamos al lado, muy cerquita, como en esas conversaciones interesantes en una reunión, en una buena fiesta. Estás por ahí al lado sonriendo un poco porque este par de personas de enfrente están conversando muy bueno y no se quiere uno perder un solo detalle. Así van a estar ustedes y también yo. Bueno, en algún momento es posible que no me aguante y haga una pregunta. O ustedes también. Esto es Gente que hace cine, donde aprendemos de cine, esta vez escuchando a sus creadores. Tenemos a Federico Durán, cofundador, productor de Rhayuela Films, con cerca de 20 títulos entre largometrajes y series. Su experiencia abarca desde la creación y el trabajo en Writer's Room hasta la producción, postproducción, promoción y lanzamiento. Es productor creativo, muy dedicado a cada etapa de la producción. Ha coproducido con Francia, España, Estados Unidos, Argentina, Brasil, México, Chile, entre otros. Combina su actividad de producción con la escritura y la dirección. Títulos, entre otros, Rebelión, Mil Colmillos, Alias María, El Páramo, La Virgen de los Sicarios. Federico, gracias por estar acá. Un aplauso para él, por favor. Federico.
Gracias. Muchas gracias por invitarme. Y bueno, pues qué chévere estar aquí en el BAM con todos ustedes.
Claro que sí. Jennifer.
Hola.
Sciarra es productora y ejecutiva de desarrollo que actualmente trabaja en Blumhouse Television. Fundó la productora Fosdoc Films y su trabajo en largometrajes, cortos y series digitales se ha presentado en docenas de festivales, incluido el Festival de Cine de Nueva York, Palm Springs, IT Fest. Jennifer fue ejecutiva creativa en Blumhouse Productions y ahora trabaja como directora de desarrollo y programación de Blumhouse Television. Tiene proyectos de largometrajes y televisión establecidos en Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, Epix, AMC, Apple, entre otras. Jennifer obtuvo su maestría en Bellas Artes en Cine con especialización en producción creativa en la Universidad de Columbia. Se graduó con altos honores y fue Producer Master Fellow y recibió el premio Mitchell Hussman Filmhouse Foundation. Jennifer, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is very exciting.
Esta conversación va a ser en inglés, pero Jennifer dice que en cualquier momento puede hacer el switch, así que empecemos.
So, Jennifer, it's great to have you here in Colombia and in BAM. I think a very important thing to know is what from the US, which is one of the biggest genre markets in the world, what do you see interesting in Latin America, in Colombia, in terms of genre of horror films or sci-fi films or TV?
Yeah, great question. So my company, we really specialize in genre and horror specifically. On the film side, on the TV side, we do science fiction, suspense, mystery, really, action, sci-fi, all forms of genre. And what is so exciting about being here and meeting so many great creators and producers is that a large amount of our audience are Latinos, abroad and within the United States. They really, I think at least 30% of all our profits come from Latinos because there's something in horror that really, I think, resonates with that audience. And there's so many great stories and folklore and whatnot that we have, mined in the past, but really should be continuing to find to make more great, successful stories. There's definitely more that we can be learning and more myths that we can be making things about, more than La Llorona. There's definitely more out there. So I think we're now even just beginning to touch the surface of how we can work together, both in Spanish language, English language. I think the themes that resonate with all of us travel really well. So I'm excited to find more stories and creators.
Okay, that's great. So do you feel that Latinos are among this audience that has been able to come back to theaters after the pandemic? And what do you think has to do horror and genre films with this comeback of theater releasing?
Definitely. It's something that we look at very closely because our TV side of the company, we've been around for around 5 years, so we're still developing our slate, but our film side really kind of started around 2007 with the success of a very, very low budget movie called Paranormal Activity. It was around $15,000 to make and then made a little under $200 million. And I think from there, that's how we, started seeing low budget. Horror can be done for a low budget. It really does. It's the concept. It's the story. You don't need huge stars. You don't need really expensive set pieces. So that was kind of the start. And what we're seeing now in theaters, because the theatrical experience is still very important to us. We do sell to a lot of streamers. We've made, I think, maybe 40 horror movies for streamers. But the theatrical experience is something we still always go for. And what we're seeing now is that, either the movie is a $200 million budget, big IP like Marvel or a Disney movie to work, or a horror film has really worked. We actually had a movie that came out last weekend that was the 5th movie of a franchise, was not even an original movie, the 5th one. And it beat Indiana Jones, which is kind of insane because that budget was very high and ours was, I think, 15 million or something like that. So I think horror has shown that, people should still invest in it because you will actually get a return on your budget. And, with the horror renaissance, I think now horror isn't, a cheap, it's not a dirty word anymore. People know that it's elevated and smart and really comments on society. So I think it's so important for the theatrical landscape right now to have. And as we see, we always get kind of breakdowns of the demographics who do attend these movies. And yes, Latinos are showing up, which is so important to experience this together in a room. So hopefully that continues, because if not, it's we'll just be watching things from our couch at home, which is not a great way to watch things.
Yeah, I think that's an experience that pandemic kind of pushed us into streaming. Nobody could do anything to avoid it. So TV/streaming turned into the option of millions of people to have some entertainment, to have some different things in at home, changed from the work to the non-work in the same space, and it was the streaming. And I think that's very important for the industry because streaming was struggling to get there, and Netflix was regarded as the only player in the streaming way. But now that there's a lot of streamers in the market and the streamers are struggling to get the subscribers, now we see that they're going back to other schemes that mix not doing all original productions for streamers, licensing and releasing in theaters, and then having in platforms, like crossing more. Like 1 year ago or maybe 1.5 years ago seemed that it would not happen and that only originals would be the way that streamers would go. From your experience having started in Blumhouse in the part of the theatrical and then going to the TV side, what do you think of this combination of having something that goes to theaters first and then goes to streaming? How can you build up an audience to go to the different windows?
It is something really interesting, and I think there's been a lot of articles about it recently, but movies that have theatrical releases, they do better on the streaming platforms when they're there versus a movie that premieres on streaming, because there is still a feeling that a theatrical movie just feels a little bit more special than one that goes directly to streaming. Who knows why, but it does. So when you know that a movie was in theaters and you see all the marketing that it got, you see the billboards, you see the articles, and you see that title then marketed to you on these platforms, you're going to be tuning into it. And I think most places have realized that by now. And I know, Amazon, a certain percentage of their movies, they're always going to now put out in the theaters first, probably not for a huge window, and then put on Amazon. And I'm pretty sure that will drive more people to watch it. I think Netflix might always just be straight to streaming, but we'll see how that goes. But it's important for the streamers to do that, because the theatrical landscape is a way you can really make money, a tangible money that you can see. Whereas you could say Extraction 2 or whatever movie was number 2 worldwide on Netflix, but what does that mean really? What kind of money or subscribers does that bring in? You don't really know. You can't measure it. Maybe they can with all the information they have. The transparency is not really there, so we can't. So releasing things in theaters is also a way to make money, so they can kind of continue making a lot of content.
Okay, that's great. And also in the same way, like to build an audience and to become visible, there has been in films, there's a special function that festivals and like non-commercial screenings generate on films. Maybe films that are small, like something that has happened for a long time in Sundance and in Toronto, that very small, maybe horror films or independent films, but very small, are cut by distributors over there, and then they are released and they're a huge success. And like what you were telling about Paranormal Activity, they become a huge success, but they were not destined to be so if there wasn't a festival or a specific place. What is happening in that sense with TV? Is it happening also? Is a way of marketing the TV shows going first to these new festivals for series and for shows that are becoming like more popular in the US and in Europe, where you can kind of give the shows a little bit of awareness before going to a platform?
It's interesting. I don't think yet the television, success through festivals translates the way it does for film, probably because, TV is more expensive. You could make a great horror film for very little money. You have a camera and a talented person, and then you could sell it, at whatever festival and make a lot of money. TV shows, I guess a few people can independently finance a pilot, but it's expensive. It's kind of prohibitive to a lot of people. So what I've seen at festivals, and what my team and I, since we make movies for streamers, but we also really are focused on ongoing genre series. festivals like Sundance and then, all the really great horror festivals, we will look at different pilots, some that have been produced, but then also a lot of scripts. We really like to get in more on the development stage at a pitch or a script so that we can produce it ourselves. And now with all the streamers, it's not as common to just make a pilot. You kind of sometimes get a straight to order series. That's what we normally do. But if the show is already finished and already has a distributor, sometimes it is great to drum up interest. Like a show that we just put out on the 7th on Amazon, The Horror of Dolores Roach, it premiered at Tribeca. And so we did get, a lot of good press and reviews and whatnot. So it definitely does help awareness, but sort of, I guess there's two ways to do it similarly in film. Either you get your big break through these festivals, or it's a movie that already had distribution, like a movie we made a couple years ago called Get Out. It was already going to be distributed by Universal, but it premiered at Sundance in the midnight section, and it just generated a lot of buzz, which helped, bring people out to the box office. So it definitely helps in that way. But I think for TV, festivals that have TV labs where you can write pilots and show them to people, that is definitely a great way to make TV through that system.
Okay, great. I think this the boundaries in between film and TV are each time less visible and less strict. And of course, all the people that are doing series mainly come from film, and maybe they come from other backgrounds, but a lot from film. But also, there's a lot of stories that begin in the film and then translate into a series, or even vice versa. What is your approach on this in the horror and with these kind of movies like Paranormal Activities that themselves could be a series because they became a franchise? But what's your take on that, into turning that into a series, an ongoing show?
Right. It's kind of an IP-based world lately, where it's just kind of an easier sell to make a show or a movie that already, was successful or had good reviews from either it was a book or a movie or whatever. So we're always looking for opportunities to, make series out of some of our more popular titles. Or, if I meet a really interesting writer who says, oh, I want to, remake this old movie, but into a series, and it sounds like something that aligns with what we want to do, we'll check on the rights and see if we can move on it together. But it is something that does make a lot of sense. But it's interesting because horror and TV is definitely difficult, because a lot of horror stories are pretty contained. And in a show, the goal for us now, we've made a lot of limited series and miniseries, but I think a lot of the buyers and platforms have been telling us we want shows that have multiple seasons that can bring people back. So you really need an engine that can keep going. So if it's a story about a slasher, a killer, or a haunted house, it's hard to make that last more than 6 episodes, really. So when we are looking, if we have a property that we want to make into a series, what we do is we reach out to a lot of creatives, and then we want to hear, I'll meet with a writer and I'll say, well, if you were remaking this but into a series, what would your approach be? And kind of the best idea wins. The great thing about TV and horror in general is you don't really need to only work with very fancy, high-level names. It's the best idea wins, really. That is what it is. So what we do is we'll have a piece of IP or a movie or whatever, and we'll just hear different people's ways in, and then we'll work together to develop a pitch, and we'll sell it and hopefully make it. But for us, the real goal is to have it go many series. So just being able to think of a show with, based on characters, because that's what you watch TV for. You watch it for the characters season after season after season. So you can generate story from there if you have that core dramatic or comedic base. So that's how we approach it. We just love to hear from other people, and we encourage them to take a lot of creative liberties. We don't want to remake the same thing we already did.
Ya vamos en la mitad del episodio, está buenísimo. Quédate ahí, por favor. Cuando tienes un proyecto audiovisual, tratas de asegurar todo desde el principio. Escribes una buena historia, buscas el mejor crew, piensas incluso en algunas locaciones, también en actores para quienes escribiste esa escena. Pero si te digo que desde el principio deberías pensar también en todo lo legal, en asegurarte de que todos y todas estemos bien, o sea, en regla, pues quiero presentarte, y ya te lo dije al principio, a Umaña Abogados. Es una empresa de asesoría legal dedicada al derecho a entretenimiento, la propiedad intelectual, al derecho de autor, la propiedad industrial. Son abogados con más de 10 años de experiencia y además de ser abogados, pues también son comunicadores audiovisuales, fotógrafos, diseñadores, docentes universitarios en áreas del derecho y de la historia del audiovisual y el entretenimiento. O sea, están súper conectados con lo que nos gusta hacer. Si conectas con ellos y ellas, de seguro vas a tener una experiencia buenísima que te va a acompañar desde el desarrollo de tu proyecto audiovisual hasta la circulación y venta del mismo. Te dejo en serio sus datos en la descripción del episodio, y si quieres conocer su historia de origen, resulta que ellos también tienen su episodio. Es el 89, ahí te dejo esa perlita. Y una última cosita, y es que el sonido de esta grabación es gracias a nuestros amigos de Mediatekis, quienes nos dieron unos micrófonos maravillosos para capturar esta conversación. Si quieres conocer más de ellos, te dejo su información en las notas del episodio.
So, in terms of, you have a Latino background, yeah. What is your take about the films or the TV shows that are done in the US going to these Latino markets, not in the US, but in the home countries? What do you think needs to be there to be marketed? What would be the ingredient that you would need for those shows to go to these, like Colombia, Panama,
Right.
Peru?
I mean, I would turn that question back to you and everyone here to see, really what's exciting you in the genre landscape. I feel like the things that we make and the things that are interesting here are very similar, universal themes. And, some things that we make are a little specific to a location, but I think, if it's a city or a rural area, there's similar areas in Latin America that the themes and characters would still resonate. So for us, it's really, working together with our distributor, with our streamers and channels. A lot of what we make is for people who do have different international platforms, but a lot of them are still pretty new. They're still trying to work out how to get an audience here. So it's really working with those teams. They have great teams based here and also in Los Angeles to see what their audience really wants. And it's something that we need to research more and tailor our material so that it travels not just, in the US and Canada and whatnot, but so that it travels here. So it's definitely speaking to producers and creators such as yourself and everyone in this room to see, what would really be a hit.
Yeah, because I was figuring out that there's a lot of horror films released in Colombia, as they are in Peru or in Chile or in Argentina, although they are not held by a major, which is like an international distribution label that it's putting them all together. They can go country by country sometimes, or they just go by what has happened in the US and distributors release them in each country. And the market audience in each country is not the huge audience, but it's a good audience that is willing to go to good horror movies and good genre films. But here in Colombia, we market our films, and that's an experience that we have been watching year by year. We market our films as Colombian movies, and that's a big barrier in my way of seeing. It's a big barrier with this audience that wants to watch entertainment, because they will go to watch a movie which offers entertainment, but once they are in the boundaries of a Colombian movie, they have disregard in terms of certain genres. But for instance, with the squad El Páramo, when we released it, a lot of people didn't know it was Colombian, and they discovered it was Colombian watching the film. And it was very interesting to see that they were really happy and like overwhelmed to know it was Colombian, and it talked about the country. But other films that has been released recently have a strong barrier with that. And I was talking with a couple of distributors in Peru and in Chile that released local films and disguised them into a non-local film, and they performed really well. So I have this intuition that maybe in our countries, the genre films are more into a non-nationalist market, and in the same way they can discover a lot of things in the film and be amused of things that they were not expecting. But for them it's really important not to go to a film just because it's from the local country. It's a way of going to something which is like you were saying, and the theaters are now filled with superheroes and these big tentpole films and horror films, but the local films, at least in Latin America, are not performing that well. Have you had the experience of releasing your films in Latin America and knowing what the performance has been, and what would it take for a local film, for instance, a film from Colombia, from Panama, or from Peru, be shown in Sundance and be picked up in Sundance and be released for the whole continent? What do you think about that? What is your impression on that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think there's been so many great examples of movies from, all different countries that have gone to festivals and sold well and then been seen all over the world. And it's a difficult thing to answer. What I think resonates, at least in the genre space. I think, if it's from a different country, it's an international film, and there is some commercial genre aspect to it, that definitely helps. Sometimes the dramas or the pure comedies, they just don't travel as well. And even now we're seeing kind of dramas and dramedies, which used to be successful in theaters, are struggling internationally, but also in the United States. There's really just not much of a market for them anymore. They're kind of all going to streaming. So to find that success from maybe a smaller market, if you make a film that has that universal theme, some commercial appeal, and some excitement to it, whether it's anywhere on the genre spectrum, not just kind of a pure drama or pure comedy, that's something that any audience will want to watch. And audiences now are totally used to reading subtitles. They don't need to speak the language. I mean, how many people watch Squid Games and shows like Dark and Casa de Papel? So I think if you kind of capture what is interesting and exciting, have some fun to it, but also have something to say. And that's how shows and movies can stay specific to the country they've come from. I feel like genre is so great because it allows us to explore different things happening within our own specific societies, but you're doing it in a way that you're being a little subtle. You're calling things out, but you're not, being bleak or depressing about it. You're dressing it up as entertainment. And things like that, I think audiences just gobble up. We love it. We love learning about other countries, but, under the guise of, we're having fun. We're seeing, either an action movie or a crime drama or a mystery or whatnot. So to have that sort of breakout, I would definitely think of keeping things, even if it's low budget, just bigger in scope. Maybe not a drama of just two people in an apartment, but some higher concept there. And then, a little social commentary, I think, is what makes things successful.
Yeah. What about, there's a common element in between Stranger Things, Dark, in a way, Casa de Papel, and other shows, which is teenager or kids. What about this? Do you think it's a fashion that will be during a couple of years and then disappear, or do you think there's something more deep into this in the horror shows, in the genre shows, that connects and resonates with the audience?
I think it definitely, if there's a great sort of coming of age horror story, it does really resonate with the audience. But what we've recently been hearing, and obviously things change a lot and nobody really knows what they want till they see it. So we call it young adult or YA. And a lot of times buyers say that they don't want it. They would prefer YA of people in their 20s more than people in middle school. But if it's a story like Stranger Things where the characters are younger, but they're dealing with very adult topics, and I think that's the difference. So if there's a story, even if the protagonist is a child, they're dealing with some very heavy things and adult themes that is evergreen. That is something that will always sell. Whereas if it's a little younger, horror in general is a little bit harder of a sell sometimes because, who are you marketing it to? There's only an age limit of people who can see certain movies. So we had a movie recently that did well for us called The Black Phone, and the protagonist is a kid. He's maybe, 12 or something, but he's going through very, very adult circumstances, and it was rated R. So you really need to not only attract children who will resonate with the, coming of age story, but you need adults to come too, because otherwise no one will see it.
Yeah, and that it's kind of paradoxic, but at the same time, when we released El Páramo, the squad, it was rated for 12 years, but we got these kids that were clearly not 12 years, but lower, and they were like flooding into the theaters and going to watch a film, and it was kind of a challenge for them to watch a film and be able to watch the film and not get scared. So I think for teenagers, the genre is something which is very important. But it doesn't mean that the topic of the film has to be about teenagers. But like in recent years, there has been kind of a lot of shows, especially on TV, that have teenagers. And one could think that it's a way of getting the audience, the teenagers, into watching the shows. But I think it also resonates on older people that kind of resemble their teenage and like the 80s and 90s and other periods of time. Do you think this is something that remains in the market for a while, or do you think it will be just a moment for what happened and for what's happening with streaming and all that they're finding a market, but maybe at the end of the decade, there's a totally different approach in general?
Yeah, there's always been, I feel like especially recently, a lot of projects that are kind of nostalgic, and they're set either in the 80s or the 90s, and they're looking back at a time, and I think what they're capturing there is a time before modern technology, where you have a cell phone with you at all times, and especially a lot of horror, because there's so many different situations that you can avoid if you have a phone to see where you're going, or you call for help. And these sort of more nostalgic projects allow you to explore more situations with the characters that aren't, you can't explain away, because you can't say, oh, why didn't that person use their GPS to do this? It's like, well, it was the 80s and they didn't really have that. So I think it'll always be something that people want to make. People just really have a soft spot for that kind of material and exploring different tropes of the genre from the past. There was a lot of great horror from the 70s and 80s that isn't, there's some that resembles that today, but I think horror today is something a little different. It doesn't just have to be slashers or ghosts. We've opened up what it means to be genre or horror. So I think for now the market might be a little saturated with nostalgic horror and shows, because it has been done so well. But there will be a time where we'll be hungry for more. And if you have a project that is that, but it's amazing, it doesn't matter that it already exists,
Yeah. The other thing that I was thinking about is that there are like a lot of things like music, for example, at certain moment doesn't seem to go too well with genre films, with horror. You don't seem to watch that much with music. But I was remembering a film that was Green Room. I don't know if you watch it. And it had this clash of two very different music feelings, like the punk scene and the skinhead scene, and in the middle this very tight and tense thriller. Why we don't see so much music in genre films? Why is it like not common?
Mm-hmm.
What? What's your guess?
Yeah, I have a theory because I was a producer on a movie we made recently it was a country music horror movie, and kind of similar to Green Room. That's a very specific world, not one that everyone is familiar with. So whereas, I may not be a big country music fan, but it is always interesting seeing a specific world, one that you don't know. You're kind of learning something new, but in a familiar genre. So I have a feeling, because at first I wanted to send it through the theatrical team because it's a really great script, but it just made more sense for streaming because it is a bit of a niche audience. There is a fear that, only people who like metal will go see Green Room, or only people who like country music will see this, or pop music this. I think we don't give the audience enough credit that they will go see a movie about a genre of music or something that they aren't a fan of, which might be true. And I think the audience are just smaller. They're more niche, but it is fascinating entering a different world like that for, an hour and a half, 2 hours. And yeah, that movie is wild. It's crazy.
Yeah. And what about current affairs? We don't see either that much of horror with current affairs. It's like something so like normal. But then you get to, was not such a current affair, but Room, it was like something that touched a lot of people because it could have been a real story, something that happened. I think there was a lot of news similar to that. Mm-hmm. And it starts as a very tense thriller. I think it was difficult to classify it as a horror film, but definitely as a very tense thriller. But as it unfolds to be like this very dramatic thing, what do you think is the take on the people that are more in the mainstream horror in this kind of films or this kind of shows that mix with current affairs, with true stories and things like that?
Right. I'll first speak to it a little bit on the movie side and then go to the TV side. But I think horror filmmakers, genre filmmakers, I think they do very much comment on current affairs, but we hide it. It is that the sugar is covering the medicine, so you can't really exactly point out. You know what the filmmaker's saying. They have such a strong point of view, but they're doing it in a way that's subtle, so you're not going to completely alienate an audience, but you can say a lot about something. And this has kind of been throughout time, even in decades past. Certain movies were, either they would kind of sneakily be about, the AIDS crisis or racial integration. Like, they definitely found clever metaphors that people who really need to hear certain messages will watch the movie and maybe learn something, where if it was branded that way or marketed that way, they wouldn't go see it because they don't want something shoved down their throat. And like Get Out had a lot to say about race relations, but if it was marketed that way versus as a cool horror story by a really brilliant person, not as many people would have seen it. And I think a great thing that I'm hoping to make more of is a lot of genre content that speak about toxic masculinity and what women are going through, but in a way that is subtle and elevated and intelligent. Because if you have a horror film that the message is you're shoving it down someone's throat, no one wants to see that. No one really wants to be told what to think. And I think horror filmmakers are great at not manipulating people into learning new things, but they're definitely subtle. And on the TV space, we actually make a lot of true crime. So a lot of TV shows based on real events, because I think, as we all know, nothing is scarier than what is actually happening in the world today. It's a little horrific in different ways. So we've made more dramatic series about politics, because politics in America and everywhere can be a horror show. And then different actual stories about, crazy stories that you can't believe are true but happened in a small town near you. So we actually make a lot of things like that, and we make a lot of movies and TV shows based on true events and true people. We have a movie we're making with Amazon, actually with Alejandro Landes, about this real woman in Mexico named Miriam Rodriguez who hunted down the different cartel members who killed her daughter and brought them to justice. It's a true story. You couldn't make it up. It's completely crazy. So we definitely now are in a golden age of these investigative journalism pieces that would make so many, great movies, great series. So we actually love diving into current affairs because as a genre company, there's nothing scarier.
Yeah, that's true. I remember when we did the squad, Jaime, the director, was like trying to talk about the fear towards not the usual enemy, but the enemy which we don't know which is. Like it could be guerrilla, or it could be something like witchery or whatever, or the army. And when we released the film, it was regarded as a horror film, and great. And 6 months ago, or maybe a little bit more, someone from the academy, someone like a professor that had not watched the film at the moment it was released, approached me and told me, hey, the squad is actually a great reflection on what is happening with our conflict and a war in Colombia, and what are we fighting against. And for me, it was like, that was what we wanted to do, but we hide it down. And when we released it, we managed to hide it really, like in the marketing, it was like really down, but it was great to have people to talk about that. So, I think in movies, at least, you can see when you watch a film, you can understand what were the influences or the initial ideas. But a lot of films, they are not marketed that way, and maybe that's because they will scare the people away.
Again, hi, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to meet you, both of you. My name is Jefferson Arias. I am a filmmaker and a video game developer. Recently, I was watching your website about there are a department of video game developing. I would like to know if the characters or the landscape you are using or you already have on your portfolio are used by developing are those experience or what is the main goal to look at the new virtual reality or extended realities? What about that topic? I am very interested to make new alliances with the national and international producers, and for a resume, I would like to know what are you looking for the new media, the new screen, the new way to look, and the new way to feel the fear, because for nobody is a secret, you're the maker of the fear. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. That's a great question. And we're very excited. We just started a video game department, which is new. It's brand new, but makes so much sense for us to get into. There's so many great movies and TV shows lately that have been based on video games. And so it just makes so much sense for us to be making our own. It's still pretty new. So what we're making right now, I think, the CEO of the company, they're having a lot of meetings with people. They're, gathering different ideas, meeting with creators and developers and whatnot. And they're trying to build up what their slate's going to be. I don't think any game will probably come out, probably till 2004, 2005, because right now we're in the building stage since we're very new. But we're looking to work with independent developers, kind of like how we make our movies. Still, compared to other video games, our budgets will be relatively small. I think maybe around 6 million or something. So we are not making Halo or Diablo or anything big like that. We're really trying to find story-driven, scary games, video games specifically. I don't think we have not yet gotten into virtual reality. I'm sure it's something we will build upon. But for now, we're really focusing on trying to put out a few small independent horror games that eventually maybe we can make into a movie or a TV show. But we like to, hear ideas from everyone. So, if you have a great idea, we'd love to hear it. I'm not as familiar with the technical aspects of it. I'm a little more on the creative development side. But definitely trying to meet with a lot of people to hear the best stories and make the best content.
Buenas, la voz en español. Y es más para Federico, ¿verdad? Sí, bueno, mi nombre es Enrique Pérez Sim, soy cineasta de Panamá y estoy tratando de hacer películas de género, específicamente en ciencia ficción. Y quería hacerte como ahondar un poco sobre esto que hablaron hace un momento sobre current events y de cómo la importancia de lo que las películas están diciendo o cómo soslayarlo para que no sea tan evidente. Y quería como saber un poco tu opinión, cómo tú sientes que eso ha ido como transformándose en los últimos años, porque siento que cuando uno está moviendo un proyecto desde América Latina, siempre esto pesa un montón, ¿no? De, bueno, ¿qué estás diciendo sobre la región? ¿Qué estás diciendo sobre tu país? ¿Y cuáles son los temas que estás abordando? Entonces, siento que eso, cuando uno está buscando fondos de financiación acá, tiene un peso. Uno tiene como que siento que quien va a apoyar estos proyectos quieren que eso esté como no soslayado. Y entonces cuando venimos hablando sobre el género, y uno quiere hacer género porque uno quiere como el valor de entretenimiento y uno quiere como tener como respetar ciertos códigos del género, y acaban de mencionar que es mejor soslayarlo. ¿Sientes que eso ha ido como cambiando o todavía sientes que para levantar proyectos desde América Latina hay que no soslayarlo? No sé si explico la pregunta.
Sí. I'm gonna answer in English to respect the format, but I feel that in the US, the horror market is a market. It doesn't depend on like funds or subsidies. Of course, you can have tax rebates and things like that, but there's no creative jury that determines what should be told or what shouldn't be told. In the rest of the world, films, especially films, are done with a large amount of subsidy money. And that subsidy money is often given by juries. And juries often have the chance, when they're juries, for once in their lifetime to give money without having the fear that the money doesn't come back. Because when you're in a company and you're deciding, I have to do this film, I have to be sure that the money is coming back. But when you're a jury, then you can be irresponsible in that sense and to say, let's take the risk. And that, especially in Latin America, has another thing that attaches, which is that is very often regarded as a successful film, a film that is selected at the main festivals. But that doesn't translate necessarily to audience, to box office. So the funds in Latin America, at least in Latin America, I cannot talk about Europe or other funds, but at least in Latin America, I think they regard genre and horror as a way in which films are not so easily selected into a festival, as a way in which it could be a commercial way, but why should public money go to a film that could be commercial? And then the genre and the horror films are disregarded in that way in the funds in Latin America. And the result is that as a great amount of the films done in Latin America and in Colombia, and I'm sure in Panama, depend on the funds, then we do much less genre films than we should, because there's no stimulus to do it. The funds are not supporting the films. And I think that's something that we should try to balance a little bit, but it's not easy to do it because the way in which is built this ecosystem is not easy to change, like with a twist. So yes, the smart films that can put this current affair or this subject visible, but at the same time have a high concept and something that the audience can really like get very, very passionate about, are the ones that are like being able to get funding, be selected in a festival, and become like something that is in the market. So I think if you're doing a project in Panama, you should try to look for this combination. I don't think it's the only valid combination, but in a way it's a way for you in Panama to be able to make it around.
El tiempo se fue. Time gone with the wind. Muchas gracias por haber estado acá en Gente que hace cine. Qué bueno que dejemos registrada esta conversación y que esta conversación la podemos compartir con más personas. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
Jennifer.
you. Thank you everyone who attended. This was so fun.
Gracias Federico, una vez más
Muchísimas
por conversar.
gracias.
Qué bueno. Bueno, y a ustedes, un aplauso para ellos, por favor.